Because there have been years where I've really tried to really cut back on water. And then they look really great, and then about 10 weeks in, they just kind of crash. And just, yeah, I think it's just kind of learning what works at your plot and what works with your soil, I think is kind of the hardest thing, and that just comes with time and doing it year after year.
In the bag, then you spilled your coffee 'cause you're yelling at coyotes in the bathroom, and you thought I'd crack 'cause I'm made of porcelain too. And the sky is red, just like his eyes, when he dreamt his bed was empty and dry. Then it rained so hard the salamanders moved to LA.
Lots of people don't know what dry farming is, and I think the easiest way to think about it is agriculture without added irrigation water. So in the case of California, that means that though it rains a lot in the winter here, over the summer we don't get any rain at all, and farmers are still able to grow crops over the summer season without adding irrigation or with adding very little irrigation. They're able to do that by using a combination of practices that help build soil water holding capacity and can really grab onto the winter rains and hold them in the soils so that over the course of the summer, plants still have access to enough water to be able to survive and produce pretty delicious fruit. I first got connected with Jim Leap through some folks at UC Santa Cruz. He used to be the director at their farm there. And when I got this idea to start thinking more about dry farm tomatoes, everyone immediately said, talk to Jim.
So in 1990, we planted our first crop of dry farm tomatoes at the UCSC farm and grew them every year well, they're still growing them to this day. It's really amazing what you can do. And I was just shocked when I first did the dry farm tomato project at UC Santa Cruz. I was shocked at how successful it was. It's like, this doesn't make any sense. How could the plants possibly be doing this? How can they root so deep and continue to find moisture in these systems? After I met Yvonne and realized what she was attempting to do with her research, then I gave her a bunch of contact information of dry farmers working here on the Central Coast. Then they became, then she, communicated with them, and then they became collaborators on the grant.
So I got connected with 7 farms and started by just having conversations about what kinds of questions would be exciting to answer together. Farmers had been noticing that dry farming presents these unique challenges since there's so little water in surface soils for most of the growing season.
Moving out here and farming here became very apparent very quickly. Efficient management of water was an important thing that we needed to consider as farmers. It was a responsibility, and so dry farming became something that, yes, for the tomatoes, but something that we need to keep in mind for any crop.
I think there's a lot of challenges with getting into dry farming. The first initial steps are challenging. The reason why I say that is I think that in order to do dry farming well, you typically need a good soil profile that has been worked to a certain degree, but not too much tillage. You also need something with a good amount of organic matter, and that may come from a number of years of previous cover cropping, of previous work to it. If you're starting a new field, or a field that, let's say, was used in a conventional system, you're transferring to organic, or even an organic system that just wasn't really focused on soil building through things like cover cropping, I think you may run into issues. So I think you really want to focus on building up your soil profile well before you kind of dive headfirst into it.
Right, because when surface soils are super dry, plants can't access nutrients for them like they would in an irrigated system. So this is a completely different paradigm to be operating in. And farmers are also really interested in microbial communities, and especially ones that might be able to provide plants with nutrients and help them cope with water stress. In particular, there's this symbiotic fungus that I've done a lot of work with called arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, or AMF. And it's being offered now as a commercial inoculant that it helps plants get nutrients and manage water stress. So we thought that it could be really helpful for dry farming. So yeah, we got to work. We set up experimental plots on all 7 farms to do inoculation trials, and we took a ton of soil samples all the way down to 3 feet into the soil profile to get a better sense of where plants were accessing nutrients from. And we also took DNA samples from the dry farm plots and also from nearby irrigated soils to see how the fungal community was changing with dry farm management. And of course, we got to harvest so many days and weeks of picking tomatoes on these farms. And once we had all of the samples, we started analyzing them in the lab. So that meant nutrient and water tests, and then a bunch of DNA work too. We had to extract the DNA from all of these soils and roots, and then we had to get it sequenced. So that all took quite a while, but I think it really all turned out to be worth it. There's always a moment when you're in the lab thinking, is there any way all of this data is actually going to mean anything? And it turns out in this case, it actually did. And I think a huge part of that was co-designing the questions with farmers who really knew what was going to be interesting in the system and what they were excited to find out. First of all, we wanted to know, how deep are plants going to access water and nutrients? And do surface soils make any difference at all? Second, we wanted to figure out if commercially available AMF inoculants were effective. And third, we wanted to know more about the fungal community in general. We wanted to figure out if it was changing in dry farm soils and if those changes made differences for harvest outcomes. For me, one of the most interesting and exciting things that's come out of the research so far is this idea that the fungal community in soils changes with dry farm management. And I think that makes some intuitive sense, that the soil community really responds to a completely different seasonal pattern of water. But actually being able to look at the results and see it right there in front of me was very exciting. And it was even more exciting to then see that sort of fungal signature that came with dry farm soils was also associated with higher fruit quality, that however the soils were changing actually had a positive impact on the plants that were being grown in those soils, on those tomatoes.
Yvonne's research, it was very insightful to listen to her results. I think, for one, the inoculation, we were very intrigued by the possibility that would provide some additional support to the dry farming practices. So it was good to hear on that front. It was something that, the research provided us that test that it would have been a little bit risky for us to do on our own. I think the finding that still stuck with me is how over time on parcels or plots of land in which that have been dry farmed, that they sort of end up being the ones better suited over time because of the fungal communities that develop.
If somebody's interested in dry farming, I think it's worth putting in the research and the effort to kind of make it work. I think from let's say a marketing perspective for things like tomatoes, it does make a pretty sizable difference as far as just the quality of the tomatoes, the flavor, and in turn what you can receive sort of in the marketplace. It differentiates your product quite a bit, so I'd recommend it on that end. Additionally, from just a general sort of water management, irrigation management system, I think it's worth being at the bare minimum familiar with.
I would say to the young farmer to be patient and give it a try for part of their production and then move on as they get a better sense of what their conditions are.
I think the most important takeaway for me has been how, as a scientist, and how can we as a society support dry farming and start to transition California's agricultural system to one that is more resilient to the water shortages that are certainly coming in our near future. Part of that is the incredible work that these farmers have done to build markets where consumers are excited to eat these really high quality fruits, tomatoes, and in some other cases, stone fruits are starting to be dry farmed, and squash, and beans and potatoes. And so if you see dry farm produce at the farmer's market, talk to the farmer, get to know them, get to know their practices, and support them. Buy that produce and help these small diversified farms that are really meaningfully shifting what agriculture can look like in terms of a low water future in California.